Okay, I'm here, but I'm going to try to point at this so you can sort of see what's going on in terms of neurodevelopment. As complex as the human nervous system is, it starts out embryonically as a very simple tubular sort of what they call ectodermal structure because there are three sort of cell layers in the developing embryo. There is the ectoderm here on the surface, right? There's the mesoderm here in the middle, and then there's the endoderm down below. And most of the neurons, most of the cells actually that are going to be found in the human nervous system are going to be derived from the ectodermal layer. There is actually a mesodermal contribution, the microglia, which are actually glial cells that are part of the immune system in the brain, actually that are derived from the mesodermal layer, and that's actually the layer that also gives rise to other elements of the immune system in our bodies. But most of the brain cells and most of the glial cells, the macroglia or larger glia, like the myelinating glia, like that oligodendrocyte I suggested, that provides the myelin, for the white matter, actually derive from the ectodermal layer. So in response to chemical signals from the underlying midline mesoderm, this longitudinal band of ectoderm, so this band that sort of extends all the way to the front of the embryo and all the way to the back, so all the way kind of along the back of the developing embryo like this. This is quite a ways further on than what we're looking at right over here. Will thicken, and it forms what we call the neural plate. And the neural plate then folds inward, so it sort of folds inwards, right? Forming what they call the neural groove in the midline, and it's flanked by these parallel sort of neural folds on each side. And the neural folds approach each other and they connect at this dorsal midline right here and form this neural tube, which runs all the way up and down, the back of the developing embryo. This is known as primary neurulation. Neural tube develops into the CNS. So the cavity here in the middle actually is going to be the ventricles, the spaces through which cerebrospinal fluid flows, and the canals that connect the ventricles. Well, some of these cells at the top here are called the neural crest cells. These are going to actually develop into the sensory neurons of the dorsal root ganglia of spinal nerves, some sensory cranial nerves as well, actually. The postganglionic neurons of the autonomic nervous system, so the neurons that are kind of located in the peripheral nervous system and, directly contact the heart, for example, or other organs to change, their autonomic activity. For example, the Schwann cells that are going to be the glial cells that provide myelin to neurons that are located in the peripheral nervous system. So the neural crest really becomes the peripheral nervous system, while the neural tube is going to become the different portions of the central nervous system. Now, along the spinal portion of this neural tube as it's developing, you're going to get this kind of infolding. It's called the sulcus. A sulcus is kind of like an infolding or valley, right? Limitans that'll separate the dorsal, right, which is, remember, on the back portion of the spinal cord, and the ventral regions of the spinal cord, which is towards the front, right, and brainstem. It actually sets up a sort of functional specialization. The dorsal is going to be largely sensory, while the ventral is going to be motor. So when we talk about, for example, all the nerves, we're going to be talking about more of the spinal cord, but there are 31 pair of spinal nerves that come toward, that emanate, and enter the cord. They're symmetric. There's one on either. There's pairs of nerves. There's one on each side. But the dorsal portion of the nerve is going to contain a clump of cell bodies that's called the ganglion. This is called the dorsal root ganglion. While the ventral is going to have cell bodies that are located inside the central nervous system of the cord, and their axons are going to extend out, form the ventral roots, and then those nerves are going to come together. You got both sensory and motor components. The dorsal, because the sulcus limitans that's sort of established at during embryonic development, is going to set up this functional specialization where the dorsal portions of the cord and brainstem are going to be more significantly associated with sensory functions, sensory inputs, while the ventral portion is more critical for motor output. Now, the tube itself, the neural tube, starts to develop all these kind of flexures or bulges, right? And the primary sort of bulges, or they sometimes call them vesicles, right, of the neural tube include the forebrain portion here. This is also called the prosencephalon. So here again this is from the most anterior, right, or most rostral portion of the developing embryo. Here's that neural tube, right, and here's the cord, right. Here's the caudal portion. So here's the forebrain. This clump right over here is going to become the prosencephalon, and as that further develops, it develops these secondary vesicles. One is called the telencephalon, which is all the way towards the front, right? And it also produces this thing called the diencephalon, which is this another bulge a little bit further back. Di is second, right? The telencephalon becomes your cerebral hemispheres. The diencephalon is going to become the thalamus. The hypothalamus. Also, turns out the retina is formed from the diencephalon, while the cavity becomes the lateral ventricles and the third ventricle. And we'll talk more about that as we continue. Then the next bulge is called the mesencephalon, right? This is the midbrain. It'll become the midbrain. Becomes a secondary vesicle, also called the mesencephalon. The cavity becomes the cerebral aqueduct, which we're going to see will connect the third to the fourth ventricle. And then we've got the back portion here, which is the rhombencephalon, or hindbrain, right? I think I have it up here too. Yeah, here's the hindbrain. The rhombencephalon is the hindbrain. And that's going to start to split and become the mesencephalon, right, which is going to be the pons, which is part of the brain stem, and the cerebellum are going to develop from this rhombencephalic, precursor, and the mesencephalic portion of the rhombencephalon. And then there's also what we call the myelencephalon, which is going to be the most caudal portion, right, the most tail-like portion of the brainstem, which is called the medulla. So the telencephalon, in the textbook, they go into some detail about the growth of that telencephalon. Read over that. It's huge in humans versus other primates.